the Harris Football Podcast with your host, Christopher Harris.
Welcome. Hey, welcome in. I am, in fact, Chris Harris. This is, in fact, the Harris Football Podcast. Thank you very much for listening to this little podcast that could. We're 5 weeks in. I hosted a Twitter chat Monday night before the football game started and definitely sensed a rising panic. Now, if you're 1-4, I guess we are pretty much to the point where it's do or die time. Time to shake things up. Probably one waiver move isn't going to solve what ails a lot of teams. It may be time to pull the trigger on a big trade, send out multiple players, take on some of the super disappointing guys so far, get them at a discount, and just hope. It's like Marshawn Lynch, Alshon Jeffrey, Mike Evans, Calvin Johnson, LaShawn McCoy, Dez Bryant maybe for one more week. We'll see when he looks like maybe coming out of the Cowboys bye. Eddie Lacy. You know, most of those big names probably aren't going to completely turn it around and lead you to glory, but at this point, it's probably worth taking a chance. I admit there are definitely some 1-4 teams who've scored the most fantasy points in their league and have just been totally snake-bitten, but most such teams need serious help, whereas in the first few weeks of the season, you usually hear my soothing, dulcet tones advising you to wait and see. We're pretty close to halfway through the regular season in fantasy. Now's probably the time to start taking on risk, to buy low. It probably won't save you, but at least it'll give you a chance.
Today's kickoff.
So I'll continue with my review of the game film from Week 5. If you missed Monday's show, and some folks might have, because for many it was a holiday, check out Monday's show. I talked about some of the better games of the week already, and today we'll hit the fantasy-relevant players from the rest of the games. But let's face it, like, better games, worse games, who cares? It's fantasy. There's something to learn in every single game. I'll be talking Steelers-Chargers, Jags-Bucks, Browns-Ravens, Cardinals-Lions, Rams-Packers, and the immortal Bills-Titans tilt. I want to get back to also playing indie music from real bands and not just parody songs. So today we've got a really, really good one from Nathaniel Ratliff and the Night Sweats. And then I'll talk about the Week 6 waiver wire with Silva of Rotoworld. And Evan and I will also have a bit of bonus talk about possible buy low candidates. We're brought to you today by SeatGeek, the best way to get tickets for any sporting event. How about Michigan State going to the Big House to take on Michigan this weekend, or Alabama going to College Station to play undefeated Texas A&M? Tough tickets, but not with SeatGeek. And SeatGeek does things that other online ticketing sites don't. It pulls in ticket options from hundreds of online sellers, so when you shop on SeatGeek, you're seeing virtually every ticket option available for that game, all on one page. Best thing I think they do, they have this cool thing called Deal Score. It ranks every ticket on the market with a 1 to 100 value score, so you can easily identify the best ticket values in the building. And SeatGeek's mobile app makes the ticket buying process seamless and easy. Once you find your ticket, 2 taps, it's yours. So download the free SeatGeek app right now. Inside the app, enter the promo code Harris, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Every ticket purchased on SeatGeek is backed by a 100% guarantee. So download the free SeatGeek app and enter promo code Harris. Well, many of you watched the Monday night game, Steelers-Chargers, so let me see if I can crystallize what many of us saw. That was a terrible game offensively. Very ugly. The limiting factors for the Chargers, pretty obviously, an offensive line that isn't good anyway and just got ruined by injury. And the limiting factor for the Steelers is Mike Vick. Should have thrown 3 obvious interceptions to the point where the Steelers really couldn't trust him to do much of anything until they were desperate. And John Gruden was actually calling for Landry Jones to come into the game. Antonio Brown owners, you are officially working yourself into a frenzy over this. It's just not going to be the same for Antonio Brown as long as Vic is in there, because Vic apparently isn't allowed to change the play at the line and is under strict orders not to take chances, which of course never stops him from making dub throws because he's Mike Vick, damn it. My advice for Brown owners is, you can't sell him because Big Ben's coming back. You just have to weather the storm. There's a chance he plays Week 6, Roethlisberger that is, and Week 8 after the bye. That's looking more and more likely. In fact, let's put Brown onto that list of players to buy low on. Pay a discount. Don't pay full price. But see if the Brown owner in your league is panicked, because Brown is going to be awesome again once Roethlisberger is under center. Le'Veon Bell is awesome, worth waiting for. I know I took him 3rd overall in a draft and feel mighty nice about it right now. Antonio Gates scored 2 touchdowns, and Ladarius Green played a bit, but went back to a reserve role, though it's worth noting both guys were on the field a little bit when the Chargers went spread. And Melvin Gordon, very tweeted about last night. Lost an ugly third-quarter fumble, but the best news of the night for him was he was right back out there getting carries after the fumble. Danny Woodhead had one big catch and run early on a first down, but you watched that game, you saw that a lot of his receiving yardage can be empty calories, 3rd and longs, where he gets 10. Gordon's the guy the Chargers seem to want to use. I got some in-game angry tweets as Gordon wasn't doing much, saying, man, this guy only is getting 2 yards every time he touches it. How is he so special? And, it's kind of like defensive of me to say, well, look at the offensive line, but it's also kind of true. And I think more importantly, as the game went on, Gordon showed his power and acceleration. The 4th quarter, a couple good-sized chunks after heavy contact. It's a platoon. I'm not any longer trying to sell you that Melvin Gordon is anything like a full-time back. This is what number 2 fantasy backs are right now, right? They are going to be game flow dependent. They are going to be subject to stretches of a game where they don't do much. But I look at Gordon's skills, and I know he was stuffed a bunch, but when he gets anything going, balance-wise, you see him take hits, and he stays on his feet where a lot of running backs would go down. I think there's legit sturdiness there and balance. The acceleration when he got to the corner, the few times he got to the corner, was real. He'll be up and down. Touchdowns aren't going to be abundant, but he's a really good prospect. We're sponsored by DraftKings, and we had another fun week in the Harris Football Listeners League. This time the good folks at DraftKings put together one 300-person room, and KLM 64 took home first place, and 67 of the 300 people took home a little something. It's been fun to play with all of you. It's a fun challenge every week to choose new players based on that week's matchups, and that's what's cool about DraftKings. It's absolutely week to week, and it's on demand. You can play whichever weeks that you want. You can play in the guaranteed prize pool and shoot for the very big money, as in become a millionaire. And you can play in smaller groups where your odds improve, but of course the stakes are lower. I still have a lot of fun with it each week, and if you're one of those folks who get miffed about DFS, my guess is you've never actually tried it. But now's your chance. DraftKings will give you a free contest to try it out when you sign up and use my promo code Harris. That's DraftKings.com, promo code Harris.
Game Film Rewind.
One of the most common questions I've been getting on Twitter is about Doug Martin. Should you be selling high? Well, I'll say this. The tape is great, and Jags Bucks is no exception. Anyone who's followed me over the past couple years knows that I'm a believer in the Muscle Hamster's ability. He's the right combination of powerful and quick and fast. And on a good team with a durable body, he might be a perennial star. check out his 39-yard run at the beginning of the second quarter in this game against the Jags. He's stuffed. He stays upright, speaking of really good balance, shifts left, outruns a defender, breaks another tackle. It's great stuff, and most NFL runners can't do it, and it's why he reminds me so much of vintage Ray Rice. But should you explore selling him high while Tampa is on bye this week? I'll say yes. Don't give him away. He's not a must-sell high because, I evaluate talent, and I think the talent is real. But think about how often he's been injured, and think about how bad the Tampa offense can look some weeks. I'm absolutely fine continuing to use him as a number 2 fantasy back. It's where I've had him rated since the very beginning of the year, and it's where I'll keep having him rated until he gets hurt. But if someone really wants to pay me for him, I know running backs who are producing well are rare right now, but yeah, I definitely would take a listen. Let's overall not get crazy about Jags Bucks because it's safe to assume neither of those defenses is very good. The Bucks actually brought in a third tackle on 27 different plays in this game and basically announced that they were going to run, and the Jags could not stop it. And Blake Bortles did throw one pick, probably should have thrown more than that, but Tampa kind of refused to catch the ball, and that one pick was a really bad pick. 4 touchdown passes, first time in his life when he'd never even thrown 3 in an NFL game before, so we're not putting that Bucks defense in the Hall of Fame either. Julius Thomas's return, he played 30 of 56 offensive snaps and only saw 2 targets, so he wasn't a siphon yet from Allen Robinson or Allen Hurns, but the workload is going to grow as he gets back into shape. The red zone touchdowns that the Allens got may start becoming more of Julius Thomas's as we get going further into the season. TJ Yeldon, happy to see him get in the end zone because his fantasy stats finally can start reflecting how much I've liked him on tape. 16 touches from scrimmage, actually one of his smaller workloads, but we'll take it in today's NFL. And Yeldon's not making many big chunk plays, but he does, I think, consistently get more than what's blocked week after week. Speaking of bad defenses, let's talk Browns-Ravens. Justin Forsett went through the Browns like a hot knife through olestra late in that game. Boy, 3 straight runs where he goes for 22, 9, and 7. Danny Shelton, defensive lineman in Cleveland, appears to be good at exactly one thing, getting personal fouls. If anything could rouse the Broncos' dormant running game next week, you'd think it might be facing the Browns. And the Ravens, they can't cover anyone. How many times do we need to see a Browns receiver running free behind the entire Baltimore defense? 49ers get them next week. Anyway, so Forsett caught a little dump off from Joe Flacco very late as the Ravens rallied and took it 32 yards down to the Cleveland 10, but Dante Whitner bent him over his ankle, and Forsett immediately acted as though it was a pretty serious problem. Didn't play on Baltimore's 1 series in overtime. We're told, I hope already the siren bells are going off in your ears, we're told that Forsett's injury isn't serious and he ought to be all right. And I hope that's the case because he's got 2 good games in a row. So, we have no real insight until we see them practice. But if Forsett were to miss time, certainly Buck Allen was active and ahead of Lorenzo Taliaferro on Sunday, which is no guarantee they'd stay that way for Week 6, but that would be the way that I would lean, especially since Allen had a 44-yard carry of his own down the left side in the third quarter on Sunday. Josh McCown plus Gary Barnidge equals fantasy gold. That is the equation to live by, obviously. McCown has at least 340 yards passing in 3 straight games, has only thrown 1 pick during that time, but he's taken 13 sacks in that span. I get being intrigued if you feel burned by Peyton Manning or Ryan Tannehill. I kind of think the scheduling gods are doing us a favor this week. He's facing Denver, probably puts a proper governor on reaching too far for Josh McCown. As for Barnidge, had a horrible third quarter drop, but I would say he more than made up for it with that insane between the legs touchdown catch. Yeah, I mean, why bet into a winning streak? It feels like at least once a game he's made a big play because the defense utterly forgot about him, but I mean, we'll take it. I used him in a league this week. It's not like there are so many rock-solid tight end options out there. If I had to choose between Barnidge and Jimmy Graham, I mean, how can I look anyone straight in the face and say that that's a dumb question to ask? I'd probably play Barnidge for the moment. I do think it goes away. He's not really a special player, but I'm not betting into that winning streak. A really good sign if you added Duke Johnson last week, that the split job in Cleveland's backfield continued, and actually the split was way in favor of Duke. He had 49 snaps, Isaiah Crowell had 31, and I don't think that you'd say it was entirely because of game flow. Duke actually started. He was immediately involved in the passing game. Robert Turbin didn't play, although that's probably coming at some point. So, yeah, Duke Johnson, I mean, this is what number 2 and flex running backs are, right? Week to week, it's going to be a total crapshoot. There could be a week where Duke Johnson just disappears, but it's good to know that he's certainly ownable in all leagues. For the Ravens receivers, Kamar Aiken got 3 targets early on. He caught them, but had 0 catches and 2 targets in the second half in overtime. So, disappointing considering how he started. Marlon Brown wasn't in his way, but the answer with no Steve Smith appeared to be just, we'll throw it to the backs and the tight ends in Baltimore. My John Brown love continued unabated in the Cardinals-Lions tilt. Wasn't much for any receiver to do for Arizona in this dumpster fire of a game, but I just still love the guy. He catches a bomb from his own 1-yard line where he just flashes the ungodly speed and outruns Darius Slay, who's a perfectly good corner. And then the touchdown in the red zone, a post, showing some courage, going over the middle, despite being teeny, outrunning everyone, actually didn't wind up taking a hit. Larry Fitz got his. He got a reward with a garbage time score late, too, and he deserves to be ranked higher than Brown, but I think the 2 Cardinals receivers are going to see their fantasy values level out over the season and be real close to one another. Chris Johnson called him a sell high last week. I still stand by it, I think, but you can't argue with the performance. He busted 2 long ones, proved his speed hasn't gone anywhere when he's motivated. You're not getting physical runs out of him. I still don't think he really cuts much, but give him an opening. And the Cardinals line has been doing that to a great degree this year, not least because defenses fear the heck out of that passing game. Give him that opening, and Johnson will really scoot. I thought this was his best game with the Cardinals. Andre Ellington didn't get a carry until the third quarter Sunday and had 3 touches overall, so don't be overly fooled by the 63-yard touchdown against a pretty dispirited Lions defense. This is definitely still CJ K's job for now, for sure. Matthew Stafford benched. Calvin Johnson, not benched, but subject to Matt Stafford's subpar play, still not showing a lot. I'll say this for Megatron. Like I said off the top, I think you can still buy low on him. But, make sure you're buying really low. Like, you're giving up LeGarrette Blount and Leonard Hankerson for him, right? You're not giving up Doug Martin for him. Know what buying low means, right, Cousin Josh? If the Megatron owner in your league doesn't want to give him to you at a discount, don't buy. The reason I'm buying is because I don't believe it can stay this bad. I don't believe he's hurt, at least not yet. And the schedule, I think, lightens up. I mean, it's been a tough run of 3 or 4 games in a row. They get the Bears. The Lions get the Bears this week. The Vikings and the Chiefs thereafter. I mean, those are not, especially the Bears and the Chiefs, those are not elite pass defenses at all. You're not going to say that Johnson ripped up the Vikings in week 2, but it was his best game, and he had 17 targets that day. And the Lions running backs, I'm going to talk about them briefly in the waiver wire segment later in the show, but man, what a mess. Amir Abdullah, I kind of had a feeling about him for DFS, and that feeling could not have been more incorrect. It kind of started out okay relative to how well stuff was blocked the first month of the season. Thought it was better, and Abdullah was getting some tough interior yards. He had a nice catch. The Lions were even inclined to forgive his punch-out from behind fumble. But then he fumbled a kickoff. Yeah, I mean, it went out of bounds, so the Lions kept the ball. But that was it. He never saw the field again, and Zach Zenner got the job. So let's talk about Zenner. What I like about him is, hell yeah, truth in advertising. He'll catch it a little bit, but mostly it's north-south, not much open field ability. He had a third quarter run I thought was pretty emblematic of this, like the left tackle blocks down. It's a simple lead. The left side of the defense just opens up, and if he could have gotten to the corner, and the corner wasn't very far away, you could see where some acceleration he could have got around Gerard Powers and had a big run, but it's just not there, and he knows it's not there. He's not going to try to make that move. It's not what he is. The Lions would certainly be better off if Abdullah could be their guy, or frankly, if Joique Bell could be their guy, and he might be back this week. But, we're going to have to wait and see how long his banishment lasts. Starting Abdullah next week would be a leap of faith because we're not going to know about his usage no matter what the Lions say to the media. I'm sorry I've waited this long to talk about Rams-Packers because that means I've waited this long to talk about Todd Gurley. Oh my God, you guys. He's arrived. He's so good. Even before the 55-yard run in the fourth quarter that, finally made his stat line look really good, he was still really good. He was powerful, and he's quick, and you can't believe how big he is for the acceleration that he has. I know there are a lot of people in the world who are super psyched about Devontae Freeman, and rightly so. The production's amazing. But my answer to that is get NFL Game Rewind. It's under $100 for the whole season. And watch Freeman run, and then watch Gurley run. If you want an idea of what I'm looking for on tape when I gush about guys, it's Todd Gurley. Side note, my job as a fantasy analyst is, I'll admit, a fair amount of smoke and mirrors. I mean, I don't have inside sources, you guys. And I worked at ESPN, and I didn't have inside sources then either. And trust me when I tell you, no fantasy analyst has any inside sources no matter where they work. In other words, we pretty much read the same things and see the same stats that you do. And this is how I wound up changing my career into film watching, because I feel like it's literally the only way to get a competitive advantage over the people who just look at the box scores and just look at the numbers and decide what they think based on what's just happened. So I can't tell you, and nobody can tell you, about who'll be used and who'll be benched. I can't tell you whether this questionable guy will be a decoy, even if he's active, and nobody can. So when you hear fantasy analysts telling you they know about stuff like usage, etc., call BS on them, because it's just not true. So the only way I think I can get an edge is just by telling you what I see on tape, be agnostic about it, tell you who, in my opinion, looks talented and who doesn't. And Todd Gurley? Oh, holy mackerel. I can't promise you there won't be games he gets stuffed. There probably will. Nick Foles played maybe the worst game of any non-Brandon Whedon quarterback this year on Sunday, and that does make it hard to run sometimes. But I'm saying, you watch Devontae Freeman run, and it's a limited playbook. And he's got all this open space, and it's the kind of thing I worry will go away because I don't think he's really even an above-average player. But Gurley, I mean, they are stacked to stop him. He's amazing. He's huge. He gets through the hole so fast. This is with a torn ACL less than a year ago. You can just see the defensive guys react with shock when he carries the ball. I had somebody ask me on Twitter several times whether Eddie Lacy will have a big second half like he did last year. I guess that's the kind of question that other fantasy analysts can answer. I don't know. I mean, how can anybody know that unless you've got the Gray's Almanac? How can anyone claim to know whether Eddie Lacy's going to have a big second half? So I don't feel like that's my job to tell you that, right? All I can tell you is talent and whether or not talent matches current role. And the reason I'll keep ranking Lacy high is because I think he's very good and I love his quarterback. So I love his situation. So I think eventually he will have some touchdowns. I don't have a crystal ball, and Lacy is stuck on one touchdown after 5 games. If you want to give up on him, Cool, I get it. He hasn't paid for his price tag yet. But, even this year when he hasn't produced big numbers, and and plus previous years, I know there's talent there, so I will still rank him highly. Finally, we get to Bills Titans, where our Week 1 hero, Bishop Sankey, kicked the game off right, decided to fumble on the opening kickoff on his own 2, and the Bills recovered, and, of course, the Bills were offsides on the kickoff. Yep, that's about what this game was. It was awful. Kendall Wright actually could have made his week right away. He had Stephon Gilmore roasted for a long touchdown on a double move in the first quarter, but Marcus Mariota, really started to look like a rookie in this game. He underthrew him by a mile. The Buffalo running game was boom and booby. I thought Boom actually showed a few moves early on, but he fumbled in the third quarter, and even though the Bills recovered, he only got 2 more carries after that. Dixon. Booby Dixon. Not a fan. He's LeGarrette Blount North. 233-pound player who won't run like a 233-pound player. Tries to leapfrog a tackler. I can't stand him. Hurry back, Carlos Williams. Mariota got the ball back with 1:40 left in the entire game. He was down 1 point, and he threw a duck into triple coverage to ice his team. And the Titans, they did give Antonio Andrews a 1-yard touchdown, but Dexter McCluster had the most carries in this game of any Titans running back. I'm having a hard time getting through this game. All right, let me say a positive thing to close it out. Tyrod Taylor. All right, it wasn't a particularly good day. But what I like about Taylor here is even on a day when he really did have nothing going, when the Bills' offense looked lost, no semblance of a run game, no semblance of a pass game, they punted on all 5 of their first half possessions, and the first one in the second half. They went 3 and out on their first 3 possessions, had 5 first downs midway through the third quarter. Have I convinced you that they were struggling? I'm not going to blame Taylor for all that. They're missing a ton of weapons. But I like the fact that Taylor can still help you fantasy-wise on such days. I worry that there's a series of stinkers on the way because he's not a talented thrower. He's just not. He's not a really good NFL caliber thrower. But if Cam Newton can be a fantasy weapon, can't be hypocritical. Tyrod Taylor can too. The 22-yard touchdown run in this game, a thing of beauty. And, when he finally needed to drop one in the bucket on a deep throw to Chris Hogan, he did it. I don't think that Taylor is a top 10 fantasy quarterback from this point on the rest of the year, but, I absolutely don't mind if you ride the train as long as you can to see if I'm wrong. I don't mind selling him high, although this game, maybe some of the sell high has lost its luster, but I also don't mind if you keep him and ride that train.
Harris's music digression.
Well, let's not try to sell this next act as some major discovery of mine. They were on Jimmy Fallon, I think, just a couple months ago, so they're breaking, but they were really, really nice enough to let us use one of their songs. And there's a little bit of a story behind it because my Twitter friend, Sam Van Hallgren, who just happens to be one of the producers on Film Spotting, one of my favorite podcasts, and I know many folks who listen to my show also enjoy the Film Spotting, the movie podcast. He tweeted to me and said, you really, really need to listen to Nathaniel Rateliff and the Night Sweats, and in particular, the song S.O.B. It'll really get you going. And it does. S.O.B. is a great song. It says a word that maybe I don't necessarily think should be on the podcast. So we didn't ask the band if we could use that song. Instead, we used this one, which is awesome. The whole record is awesome. The record is self-titled. It's called Nathaniel Rateliff and the Night Sweats. And this song is called Howlin' at Nothin'.
Today's guest.
And today's guest, it's our buddy Evan Silva. I'm sure you already follow him on Twitter at Evan Silva, but just in case, please follow him on Twitter at Evan Silva. Evan, how are ya?
Chris, I'm doing well, man. Doing well.
Thanks for coming back. And it's our waiver show. I've just finished with the film review for the week. People heard me talk about all the games, and so now let's put some of it into action. Before we do our typical traditional weekly waiver countdown, which is fun and sweeping the nation, I wanted to ask you a couple of buy low questions, because this certainly is the time of season where, you know, it's time to start thinking about reshaping your roster or finding bargains. And I've had a ton of Twitter traffic asking me, should I buy low on that guy, whatever. So I have three names for you. Running backs who are, by any measure, except maybe Cousin Josh's, they are low. And I wonder which of these three running backs you'd be most wanting to buy low on, obviously understanding that you wouldn't give up exactly the same thing for each guy. I've got LaShawn McCoy, Lamar Miller, and C.J. Anderson.
I would not be wanting to buy on any of those guys.
Okay, that's a good answer too.
Maybe Lamar Miller, actually.
Okay.
I could see Lamar Miller. You know, the Dolphins need to get back to just getting first downs and just, you know, maybe 3 yards in a cloud of dust, and they need to get back to running the football. Their new interim coach is a blocking tight end. I think that's what he's going to want to do. He does make some sense. I don't think that C.J. Anderson is running well. And I think that Ronnie Hillman over the course of the season may prove to be the Broncos' best option. But I have one for you, and I think that he's an obvious one because he started slow now in the first 3 years of his career, and he's kind of generated momentum over the course of the year, and that's Eddie Lacy.
Okay, yeah, he's low. I got so many questions about him, yeah.
Yeah.
So what would you... Okay, so let me ask you two questions about those two running backs then. So for Lamar Miller, what's the, like, at the receiver level, like, what's the most you would think about spending to get Lamar Miller on your bench? Just put me in the neighborhood. It doesn't have to be the exact right guy, but we're talking about somebody who's definitely not starting for you right now.
I think about giving up Allen Hurns for him. I'm thinking of a wide receiver that has kind of had a strong start that, you know, I still wouldn't feel good or comfortable starting every week.
Yeah.
And I think that Allen Hurns kind of falls into that class, especially with Julius Thomas coming back.
Like Leonard Hankerson, maybe that kind of guy?
Yeah.
Leonard Hankerson seems to be the poor guy is like my catch-all for the lame receiver who I figure won't continue, and I'll trade him away. He's a poster child. So, okay, well, then Eddie Lacy. Obviously, you'd have to pay significantly more to get Eddie Lacy. At the wide receiver level, can you put me in the neighborhood of what our listeners could think about paying for him?
Yeah.
Maybe, but probably not a number one wide receiver?
I mean, I would try to do a 2-for-1 to get him.
Okay. Yeah.
And I would definitely I'd be willing to give up somebody in the John Brown level, plus somebody who has been, you know, a contributor at another position early on. I mean, I would try to send 2-for-1s for Eddie Lacy, and I would want to get him on my roster before he plays San Diego next week. I mean, the Chargers have the worst run defense in football, and you know I thought that Eddie Lacy was going to do a lot better than he did against St. Louis. I mean, I played him in DFS.
Yeah. One touchdown so far this year, but you know that can't continue. Not on that offense.
Right.
It can't continue. I'm with you. I think he's a buy low. And a lot of people on Twitter are panicking and saying, "What should I do with him?" Don't sell low on anyone, but definitely don't sell low on Lacy. If I just quickly before we get into the waivers, I wanted to ask you a similar kind of question for three wide receivers, and again, none of them is a fine answer. Calvin Johnson, Mike Evans, Sammy Watkins.
I'd be trying to get the first two.
Okay, both Megatron and Mike Evans.
Yeah.
You're buying.
Yep.
And what level of running back? Again, are we talking anything more than Danny Woodhead? I mean, you're probably not going to get Calvin Johnson for Danny Woodhead, right?
Right. Yeah, under no circumstance, probably.
Yeah. So more like I just added one of the new Chiefs running backs, and someone's freaking out over that. Package him with someone, with some upside, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I really think the best way to go in these is offering 2-for-1s. Two guys who have been contributors. Your opponent that you're trying to trade with can look at the computer and see that, oh, this guy has more points than this guy to this point in the season. I'm getting 2 of these guys.
Baffle him with BS.
Right.
Never make one-to-one comparisons, right? We don't ever want to offer a running back for a running back. It's too easy to say no.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, so let's do our countdown here. We'll go 5 through 1 of the players who we would most want to add this week. And again, our threshold here is owned in 1/3 or fewer of Yahoo leagues. So for week 6, for the waiver ads, I don't have a drum roll sound effect here, so I'm going to just pretend I did one. And who would be your number 5 ad of the week?
Brandon LaFell.
Oh, nice. Interesting. He was not on my radar. Tell me.
Well, Mike Reese of ESPN Boston, who I'm sure you're very familiar with, reported on Sunday that Brandon LaFell was working out before the game, and that it looks like he's on track to return when eligible in Week 8. This is a guy who last year was a top 22 fantasy wide receiver, and he was a little inconsistent. I mean, he's not going to win weeks for you, on a regular basis. But if you need wide receiver help, getting a wide receiver who's probably going to be the number 2 in a Tom Brady offense by week 8 or week 9, that's a guy who can help you. So I think Brandon LaFell, with looking like he's only a couple of weeks away from return, should probably be owned in pretty much every 14-team league. And he should start to begin showing up on 12-team league rosters.
I like it. That's a good one. My number 5 is going to be a total cheat, and I may wind up stealing multiple names from your list, but probably not because they're all terrible. But the entire Lions' terrible backfield. We've got Zach Zenner, Theo Riddick, and Joik Bell. I'm totally cheating. But, in a deep league, I could think about taking a shot. I mean, Joik Bell's down to 25% ownership. He says Achilles is starting to feel better. He could actually play this week. The issue in Detroit is certainly more the offensive line, but the reason I would even consider any of these guys, and Bell is the best player of the group. Riddick is the most useful in PPR. I think Zach Zenner is kind of just another guy, but at least he runs north-south. But the issue here is we don't know what the punishment for Amir Abdullah is going to be. And so if that punishment winds up being severe, I guess there's a chance one of those guys could break out.
I like it.
All right, so who's number 4? I mean, even though you're not allowed to like it because I totally cheated. I mean, it's 3 names for 1. That's totally lame. Who's number 4 on your list?
Blake Bortles.
Okay, I have him as an honorable mention. Tell me why. 9
touchdowns, 2 interceptions over his last 4 games. He's currently the cumulative QB6 overall in fantasy. I mean, he's got playmakers at wide receivers and or in his pass catcher core, and he doesn't even have his pass catcher core at full strength yet. With Julius Thomas now, he was limited on Sunday, but he should be a full-time player going forward, and maybe the albino tiger, Marquise Lee, will show up at some point. But there's talent around him. If you watch him play, I don't think that the way that he has played has been quite as great as his stats.
That's being charitable.
Yeah. He's still got he's got a good arm. He's athletic. He's not accurate.
That's what it is.
And he's still a work in progress, but he's taken steps forward from last year. And we haven't even seen him with a full-strength supporting cast yet.
Yep. I mean, he's an honorable mention for me, too. I think, the problem with the idea of streaming Blake Bortles is always going to be he's always got a 4-interception game in him, and you worry that that's when you stream him. But, yep, I get you. My number 4 is Buck Allen. and it's about Justin Forsett's ankle. Forsett's ankle sounds like it's going to be okay. It didn't look so good when it happened at the end of regulation. Felt like that was a high ankle sprain, looking kind of injury, but we're being told that that's not the case in a week where the waiver list is, I think, a little top-heavy, and we're going to get to some very common names very soon. I think Allen is an okay, totally speculative ad. He had a nice play in the middle of the game when Forsett was getting spelled and Lorenzo Taliaferro wasn't even active. Possibility that if Forsett were to miss time, it could be Taliaferro, but for the moment I'll say Allen. Uninspiring pick by me, but what are you going to do? Who's your number 3, Evan?
Jay Cutler.
Oh, okay, so now I feel much better about Buck Allen. So, he played really well. I mean, the stats weren't there until the very end of the Chiefs game, but under a lot of pressure, I was really impressed about how good he was with his, in-pocket mobility.
Yeah, and I think he's played well and pretty much stayed on schedule and not made dumb mistakes.
Yeah.
In 2 games straight now, and this is without Alshon. This is without Eddie Royal in one of the games. Marcus Wilson has made plays 2 weeks in a row. I hope that when Alshon comes back, assuming Alshon comes back, they can still find ways to incorporate Marcus Wilson into the offense because, he's got size, he can run. They've got players around Jay Cutler, and he is under 33% owned in Yahoo leagues. So
sure. If I were gonna pick one quarterback between Cutler and Bortles, no question, you have them in the right order. Cutler should go first, no question about it. Marquise Wilson's an interesting kid because he reminds me a lot of Terrence Williams. He's not physical at all, but you're right, he's tall and he has speed. And when Des Bryant is there, Terrence Williams is a nice little weapon because he's tough to cover one-on-one. And you're right, if Alshon comes back and starts being a target monster again and drawing a lot of defensive attention. Even Marquise Wilson is interesting as a Terrence Williams type. So it's a situation that bears watching for sure. My number 3, I feel like we've been listing him every week, but it's Ty Montgomery, still only owned in about 10% of Yahoo leagues. I never rate him very highly on my weekly ranks because he's a third receiver, but he keeps making one play a week, and so one more injury to that Packer receiver core, and Montgomery could be someone everyone wants to own. I don't mind taking the shot on him now. It's hard for me to imagine that Devontae Adams comes back to his job because Montgomery's played pretty well. Do you agree about that? Do you think Montgomery has sort of asserted himself above Adams?
Ooh, that's a tough one, Chris.
Not yet.
That's a tough one. I honestly hadn't even considered it.
Yeah. They're different types of players. Montgomery's a little bit more like Randall Cobb in terms of his athleticism, but
they've been lining Montgomery up in the backfield at times.
Yeah.
That'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
I don't know what to think about that yet. I would guess that Devontae Adams comes back and is a starter because they have a lot invested in him. But he may not be a full-time player, and they may start to really mix in Montgomery.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah.
All right, so number 2 on your list.
Well, my final 2 guys are Chiefs running backs.
Me too.
And you grouped together an entire running back unit before, so I didn't know where to go with this.
You didn't cheat. You did this. You did the right thing. So, okay, in the order, I have the same guys. So who's number 2?
Yeah, I'm going conservative based on the depth chart to date, and I have Niall Davis as number 2 and Charkandrick West as number 1.
Me too. So talk about how folks should approach the Chiefs running back situation with Jamaal Charles out for the year, because I have the exact same order.
Well, Charkandrick West is above Niall Davis on the depth chart right now. I think that the primary reason for that is because the Chiefs see Charkandrick West as a sort of Jamaal Charles light. They can line him up next to Alex Smith in the shotgun. He can run routes like a receiver, whereas Niall Davis is just a bulldozer, and they don't really like him in the passing game. That's what Andy Reid has strongly hinted.
Not only hinted, but I literally, before we started talking, I went back and listened to the broadcast of Chiefs-Bears, and ironically, they were actually talking about Charkandrick West before Charles's injury, and they said, the Chiefs, Andy Reid told us the Chiefs view Charkandrick West as a Jamaal Charles replacement. If Charles were to go down, they literally said, if Charles were to go down, Niall Davis would be the starter, but Charkandrick West, blah, blah. And that, I was like, whoa, I didn't hear them say. That was before the injury.
The thing is that this team is bad, and so
1-4, not good.
Right, and so I think they're going to need to run the ball to try to play ball control, and their defense really has been a disappointment. And Charkandrick West isn't a guy you want to give the ball to 20 times a game, whereas we've seen Niall Davis do that and do that pretty effectively so far in his career. I think that he gets more plaudits in the fantasy community than he really deserves. I mean, he's a guy, I think he's under 3.5 yards a carry in his career. But he's a guy that you can give the ball to a lot. Whereas I don't think Charkandrick West is that guy. So I really think it could end up going either way. But right now, because Charkandrick West is higher on the depth chart, because he's so much better in the passing game, I would take my chances with Charkandrick West on the waiver wire this week.
I have him in the same order and for many of the same reasons. I have the same trepidations that we've seen Niall Davis produce. I can't remember what it is, like 4 or 5 games in his career of 15 or more fantasy points. He's had those moments. He's got a weird skill set because he couldn't move laterally to save his life, right? This is why he's a good kickoff returner. But he's big. He's 230 pounds, 200, maybe more than that, and fast. Charkandrick West has that sort of legendary 40 time in his workout day that people say, is wind aided, and so we don't really know exactly how fast he is, but he's a really good short area quickness guy. So he's the one who will remind you of Charles going laterally, and Davis is the one who will plow directly into whatever's right in front of him, including his own blockers. Not necessarily always have the best football sense, but maybe be the goal line player here because he's, like you said, the bulldozer. It's probably some kind of split, and it's probably going to be a little bit frustrating, but I think knowing what we know exactly right now, if I was going to spend fab money on either one, I think I would have to agree with you on West. Which brings me to the question, if you're in a league with a $200 fab money, free agent acquisition budget, what's the neighborhood you're thinking of bidding for Charkandrick West?
To this point in the season, there really has been very little on the waiver wire.
Yeah.
And I almost wonder if Charkandrick West is going to end up going for really high costs because people have been antsy to use their FAAB money.
And there's so much money available since people haven't spent it. They've been keeping their powder dry. So what if you're the Jamaal Charles owner and you had Niall Davis because we told you that the handcuff was Niall Davis up until a couple of weeks ago, are you willing to go the full 200 on Charkandrick West?
Ooh, Chris, these are difficult ones, They're difficult decisions. This is what fantasy football is all about, man, is making the best decisions that you possibly can.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think that Charkandrick West isn't going to score touchdowns, probably. If you're in a PPR league, I think he's going to have some 5-6 catch games. And I think he's going to be quite valuable for you. But he is probably not going to score many touchdowns. And so, you have to make the decision. If you're in a PPR league, I can see being aggressive on him. In a non-PPR, I would almost ignore him and hope that something comes along better and hope that somebody else blows all their money on Charkandrick West.
Interesting.
And I'd put in a cheaper bid for Niall Davis if he is still a free agent, because I think that he will be a better bet for touchdowns than Charkandrick West. What
would that bid be if you were going to bid for Niall Davis? I mean, league to league, team to team, totally different, I understand. But if just in the neighborhood of, for a $200 budget for Niall Davis?
I think I'd be willing to go spend like $60 or $70 on Niall Davis.
Okay, and I think that's probably right to get one of them. I think if I'm desperate and I look at Charkandrick West as at least having some upside, and maybe we're wrong, and maybe he can be 75% of what Jamaal Charles was, I would be willing to spend $150. I'd be willing to spend most of the money on West. But I hear you. There's not a pure answer here. It would be nice if there were, but there isn't. really quickly, before we sign off here, I'll just run through some possible ads that are owned in very few Yahoo leagues. I like to do this because sometimes we get complaints from expert listeners who say, all those guys you mentioned are owned, although Charcandrick West isn't owned. So I'll quickly go through 5 more guys. Keith Mumphrey. I would take a look at him, the Texans receiver. I'm not going to look at Jalen Strong for the moment for obvious reasons. Derek Carrier needs mentioning because on this very program, Evan Silva came on and I asked him to pick super deep sleepers, and he said, "How about Derek Carrier?" And that's
I got one right, Chris.
Looking pretty. Although one of mine was Charcandrick West, so
Nice.
I'm not saying. I'm just saying. I would say Jamison Crowder. Interesting player. Deshaun Jackson's pretty close to coming back, and Crowder feels like a little bit of a slot open field player who can be pretty feast or famine. And if I'm going to try to find a couple of running backs, Kyrie Robinson continues to impress me on tape. I know the workload isn't there, but every time he gets the ball, it's really good. There's going to come a point where he's going to be an NFL starting running back. Maybe it's not right away, but I don't mind rostering him in a deep league. And then Jeremy Langford with the Bears as a total flyer for a Matt Forte injury. Jaquiz Rogers is out for the year with a broken arm. The Bears are signing players like Anton Smith. I think Langford would be the starter if Forte were to go down. Evan, hey man, thank you so much for doing this. I know what this in-season is like, especially for, I know I'm a little company guy. I don't really have a sense of what it's like to work for the big fantasy companies, but you work for Rotoworld. That's the big time, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Chris. I've been listening to your podcast as much as I possibly can, which is a reasonably good amount, and I really like the way it's coming along, man. So, good luck the rest of the way. I'm sure we'll speak again.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think probably now that Evan has been on 3 times, we need a song. Someone needs to do a song. I'm sure you've heard some of the songs,
Oh yeah, I need a song.
Thanks a lot, Evan.
All right, later.
And that's our show, and clearly if someone is going to write an Evan Silva tribute song, we have to mention the wind in that interview, because apparently Evan was standing in a NASA test silo. Actually, in truth, Evan is such a sweet guy. Seriously, he woke up really early to do the show. He had to step outside, and then afterwards we were talking offline, and I asked if it was cold, and he goes, "Oh, so cold." So Evan is a trooper. Evan also is one of the foundational voices in the fantasy football world. Really, you should follow him at Evan Silva. Brilliant guy. Thank you so much again to Nathaniel Ratliff and the Night Sweats for letting us use their great song. Whole record is great. I really hope you'll check out their music. I think you'll love it. On tomorrow's show, Sigmund Bloom will be back, and we'll talk about Week 6 ranks. Until then, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
The Harris Football Podcast's opening theme is Under the Gun by Apex Manor. The end theme is Tooth and Claw by OU Villain. Subscribe to the Harris Football Podcast on iTunes and never miss an episode.